Yay. Thank you so much, Lisa. Woo-hoo. Thank you. Awesome, I will. Good morning. Wow, you guys are here bright and early, and this is exciting because one of the hardest things that we do with events is getting people to show up, isn't it? Sort of like the major donor that doesn't actually make the gift. They say they're going to do it, but they never make the gift. Well, events are that way too. You don't know until you see the seats filled. And you guys have done that. So give yourselves a round of applause. You've already started out well. Very cool. How many people here started a new fiscal year July 1st? Isn't that an exciting time of the year? I have a little new fiscal year's Eve party on June 30th, just because I know so many people's lives are going to transform with that clock tick at midnight. Because what happens? It's on the screen. You start back at zero. Every year, it's back at zero, relentlessly back at zero. I had one of my colleagues in Greenville, South Carolina, where I now live, had a $500,000 month in March. Her first ever. Totally transformative for the organization. And her back to zero started the next month because she still had to hit all her goals and make all her marks, and her staff her leadership wasn't nearly as excited as she was about that amazing accomplishment. And that's what it's like to be leading a nonprofit. That's what it's like to be a fundraiser in a nonprofit. It's grinding. It can be really grinding. So wouldn't it be neat if there were different leadership styles that we could actually look at research to see what leadership style that we exhibit at our organizational level or at our department level that creates this culture of philanthropy? This is yes. Okay, great. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have assumed that. I've been from New England and I live in Greenville, South Carolina, and most of the time we still do this. But when I spoke in India, they had a figure 8 thing for yes, and so that was very confusing because you'd ask a yes question and they'd do this, and so you thought they were giving you a no. So let's try that again. Wouldn't it be nice if we could figure out research-based leadership styles that will help? Okay, this table, Mackenzie, this table right here is totally in on it. They're great. All right. So I partnered with Adrian Sargent. If you're in fundraising and if you're a leader of a nonprofit, you are in fundraising. That is how we resource our organizations. Adrian Sargent and Jen Shang, thank you, are two of the leading academic researchers in the world on nonprofits and philanthropy. And so we get to partner with him thanks to Bloomerang and Boardable and Donor Search to do some research on what kind of attributes are there of leaders in an academic body of knowledge. We didn't want just anecdotal things, but we wanted stuff that's been studied because leadership's been studied for a while now. And then he also looked at traits of how your nonprofit's doing, who's involved in the fundraising, who's helping out, and he tied them all together. So let's first look at the 4 different leadership traits. For many, this is transformative. They just didn't know this existed. So the first type of leadership that we looked at was servant leadership. Now, he didn't ask, and we had over 1,100 people take the survey, 1,100 CEOs of nonprofits. And let me just explain that. Most of the nonprofits I work with have an executive director, not a CEO. But your board members do not understand what an executive director is. In fact, they're a board of directors often, so they maybe sometimes think you're the secretary. Like, we give all the administrative tasks to you as the executive director. So I tend to talk about executive directors as being CEOs because people understand the gravitas with the CEO position, and your board deserves to hear that from you. You deserve to have that respect from the board as an executive director here. So if you're a board member, which all of us should be board members in other nonprofits, because we need that experience so that we can speak the dialect of our board members and make it ridiculously easy for them to help our organizations. And the best way to do that is to be on boards like AFP and other boards too. Well, so CEOs, 1,100 CEOs, primarily from the United States and North America, took this survey. And Adrian Sargent looked at the actions of these types of leadership and then had them measured on a scale of 1 to 7. So these leaders didn't say, I'm a servant leader, I'm a transformational leader, but they said things like, I like to serve the people I work for. I measure success by that, which is a servant leadership thing. Servant leaders in the academic body of knowledge say that they measure success by helping everybody around them, helping their board, helping their staff, helping the clients or the mission that they serve. That's how they define success. Not surprisingly, 54% of the respondents tended toward that in this survey. These are all nonprofit executives. The second one was transformational leadership. I got excited with transformational leadership because I'm a Franklin Covey certified coach, and transformational leadership is all about mission and vision. Transformational leaders rally people around a mission. And they get excited about that and get people to commit to the mission. That was the next highest group of leaders, leadership styles or behaviors that people that took the survey did. I think it was 35%. The third type was charismatic leaders. We see this all the time. Charismatic leaders can be incredibly effective, but there are some dangers to watch for with these. These are the types of people that people will just do whatever they say to do. I don't know what to do, but boy, they said to do it. Lisa's an amazing person, and whatever she wants, she likes my singing in the car, so I'm just going to follow her to the ends of the earth. The good news is there are times in our leadership where we need that. We need people to just jump because we say jump. But the dangers are people, and the academic research shows that people take risks, unnecessary and sometimes illegal risks, without questioning when there are charismatic leaders around. So we'll look at another danger of charismatic leadership in a minute. But just about 30%, 29% said that they were charismatic leaders. They had that kind of exhibited quality. The reason I'm building on this a bit is that there's two ways in working with leaders for the last 15 years, there's two ways that we have seen charismatic leaders come about. Some people are just full with charisma. They are just excited and engaging and winsome, and you want to follow them. Other people are people that were transformational leaders or servant leaders with a high degree of success. And the board just starts checking out. Whatever they want to do, we'll let them do. Now, if you're an executive director that has a board that's checked out, you want the board that's engaged. And if you're the executive director with an engaged board, you tend to want a board that's checked out so they get out of your way and just let you do your work. So the grass is always greener in different areas, but every year we have the Nonprofit Storytelling Conference. Last year, we found a guy that was burnt out, and he realized it was the charismatic leadership thing. He was a transformational leader trying to rally his board around the vision of the housing developments that he was doing. But he had 5 years of demonstrable success going from less than $1 million to over $5 million in fundraising. And so his board just thought he was the golden child, and whatever he wanted to do was great. And he didn't realize that he had shifted into this charismatic leadership role that he did not want. He wanted some pushback. He didn't trust himself entirely. So charismatic leadership, though, that is a form of leadership, and we'll see how that ties to philanthropy in a minute. And then transactional leadership. This is only 5% of the people said they do this. Obviously, we need this in some aspect in our organizations. Academics talk about transactional leadership as kind of quid pro quo. You do something and you get a reward. You do your job and you get a paycheck. And so there is that aspect, and transactional leadership is a part of it. It doesn't seem to be evidenced much in our nonprofits, at least from the 1,100 people that took the survey. Now, the magic of Adrian Sargent. He looked at those things, and then he looked to see other parts of the survey, and he said, what is a culture of philanthropy? Which, isn't that a weird term? Culture of philanthropy. It's like this elastic term that means whatever you don't have. Well, we have great fundraising, but we don't have a culture of philanthropy yet. Or your executive director goes to a conference like this and says, well, we need a culture of philanthropy. Yeah, we have 78% donor retention, and we have all these other growing things that are going really well. So twice the national average almost of donor retention. We're doing all these other things well. Yeah, but we need a culture of philanthropy. So it can become sort of a club to bludgeon people with. But what Adrian said was a culture of philanthropy was when the executive director was doing fundraising and the board and other parts of the organization. The whole organization understood that if we get a paycheck from a nonprofit, we are de facto fundraisers. We are creating the donor experience by the outcomes of the programs we do or by our interactions with them and our interactions with the community. So that is that's culture of philanthropy as he described it. He first saw that the strongest link was servant leadership, which makes sense. Servant leaders serve others, and so in doing that, there's an invitation for others to be part of the team. And so when it looked at growing revenue and participation in fundraising, servant leaders had by far the strongest correlation. The next correlation was the transformational leaders, but there was a catch here. It was only transformational leaders that had a high degree of confidence in their ability to lead. This is why I love doing marketing polls and other type of polls, but I love working with academic researchers, which I know you have a good institutions here for too, because they weren't just pleased with strong correlation of a culture of philanthropy. They dug deeper and looked at the leader's confidence, how they rank their own confidence level. And it turns out, if the leader doesn't feel like there's confidence in her ability to do her leadership, to lead their organization or her department, there's not a culture of philanthropy there. That negatively impacts their ability to raise money. And that we'll spend a lot of time on that a little bit later. Charismatic leadership, not surprisingly, there wasn't really a strong correlation of a culture of philanthropy. Charismatic leaders did the work and didn't bring people along necessarily to do it, and so they were left to do it themselves. I was working with a nonprofit, doing a feasibility study in Atlanta with a nonprofit that the donors, they were trying to raise $8 million, and most of the donors wanted to give $1,800. But they knew that this guy was an amazing guy and he was going to get it done. And I don't know how we're going to get the $8 million building in the middle of downtown Atlanta, but it's going to happen because he's done it before, which was great. They've got a lot of belief in this leadership, but that didn't help. You can't organizationally plan, like go to the bank and say, he's just a great guy. He's really going to get this done. He's good for the $7 million loan that he needs. So that was dangerous, and that's why you might want to consider shifting. If you're in a charismatic leadership role, it's also better for your organization that you start building your vision around the mission, because you may leave, either voluntarily because there's another opportunity, or involuntarily because we all do. We all end up not being on this planet. We all die. Sorry, I know it's early in the morning, but plan givers, any plan giving officers here? Yeah, yeah. So it's part of the game. It's part of the gig. So we have a duty as leaders to be helping people have a commitment to the organization, even stronger than a commitment to ourselves. Transactional leadership was fascinating. There was no correlation with the culture of philanthropy, but it was strongly correlated with declining budgets. Now, researchers know that you can't say this is a causal thing at all. It's not a transactional leadership leads to small budgets. It could be that small budgets leads to transactional leadership. So it may be that employees don't like being micromanaged, and they don't like being told, do your job and get out of my face, which a lot of fundraisers are hearing. People don't want the fundraising vision brought into the senior levels of an organization, because just pay the bills is kind of how a lot of fundraisers are treated. Maybe not in Wisconsin, but as I'm speaking around, a lot of people are getting that. So it could be transactional leadership. What's in your job description? Is this in your job description? Are you really doing what we hired you to do? Leads to declining budgets. But it also could be that when things get tight, you got to tighten the ship. You got to look to see, what are we doing and are we doing the right things? So we're not sure. We can't wait to do this leadership study again to start seeing if we can trend transactional leadership. But just as a warning, if you find yourself being more in a transactional leadership role, which happens under stress, when people are scared and they're not really sure if the board has their back or other people in their organization have their back, they may go back into a transactional leadership role. It may be a warning for you as you go throughout the rest of this day to think about, how can I build mission and vision into what I'm doing? How can I remind people that we have a job to do, and that's totally legitimate to look at the job description and make sure people are doing it. But for the sake of my fundraising, how can I also increase it so that it's back on the mission and vision? Now, remember that whole thing about the confidence level for transformational leaders? I'm going to kind of stick there, because I think servant leadership is a hard issue or a characteristic. I don't really think you can teach servant leadership. I think you catch it, or you are one. But you can totally teach transformational leadership. And if confidence is one of the key things that happens, that affects a culture of philanthropy, let's look at that. It only makes sense with all the stress that is going on. Do you guys know what this is? Pressure cooker, good. All right, just checking, because we're in an Instant Pot age, and so I didn't know. I grew up in Maine where we had pressure cookers and we did really good stuff with them. But the Instant Pot is amazing, but that's a pressure cooker, and that's our life in nonprofits. Leadership at any level in a nonprofit is like this. Think about this. Leadership in business is stressful. It is totally stressful. The research shows it. Center for Creative Leadership did a study with business leaders and shows they were trying to find out what's the one area of stress on a business leader, and maybe we can do some work and apply to that and help them there. It turns out they felt like they were getting pulled apart. There are 4 areas of equal stressors for them. But think for a nonprofit leader, it's even worse, because in a business, you're the boss, you have a staff, you serve clients, and they resource your organization. And it becomes this virtuous circle. It makes a lot of sense. Still stressful and hard. But in a nonprofit, if as an executive director, as a CEO, you're not the boss. The board is the boss. And often they think they are individually. They think each individual board member thinks they're the boss. In some places, they're actually bullying. 11 p.m. emails, and then at 8 in the morning, why haven't you responded to me? All sorts of weird stuff that goes on. But the board is the boss when they're in a meeting as the board. So if you want more good governance, Simone Joya has great stuff on that. Then you have your staff who, in many nonprofits, expect you to know what you're doing. It's just kind of what you look to your leader to do. They have some clues, but you usually try to hire smarter people that know more about areas than you do, but they're stressed from that. And then you have your clients that you serve, or your mission that you serve, the people, the land, the history, which is probably why you got into this business in the first place, because you really wanted to feed those people or take care of those kids or protect the land or preserve the history of the community. But doing that well doesn't help resource your organization, does it? Not directly. It has to come from donors. So nonprofit executive CEOs wake up every morning to be drawn and quartered. Totally pulled apart. Is it there's no surprise that there's a lack of confidence because they can see all the different areas where they're just not measuring up. And in recent work from Compass Point, 67% of CEOs said they wanted to leave their job in the next 5 years. And we just saw with the Harris Poll and Chronicle of Philanthropy, 51% of fundraisers want to leave their job in the next 2 years. Makes sense. It's a thankless task where you're just getting pulled apart. And the research that we did with the wake-up call, which there's a lot more in the wake-up call, and if you'd like a free copy of that, just leave your business card here on the stage before you go to your next session, and I'll make sure you get a copy. But we found that only 21% of leaders said that they felt very confident in their leadership ability. These are leaders. These are nonprofit leaders, people who put themselves out on a daily basis. Only 1 in 5. At your table, it could be just maybe one of you that has that strong leadership feel about themselves. But 1 in 10 CEOs of nonprofits feel like they have no confidence in their ability to lead at all. 1 in 10. If confidence impacts fundraising that way, we've got to do something about this. The good news is most of us fall into leadership and we're not given a map. We don't even realize there's a map. But there is a map, and let me explain what I mean. The first axis is your confidence axis. You usually start out really confident as a leader and you go into this lack of confidence, or what I call unsure area. And then we only get half the map, which the other half is where we get our inputs. Do we get them externally? That's where we look for first. So let's talk about Quadrant 1. Quadrant 1 is the observe quadrant. This is where you have total confidence and you're looking at other people. Because you're given a title of executive director, or maybe earlier in your career, you're given a title of director of something, and you're excited, you're confident, somebody finally believes in you. Maybe you're the captain of the team, and they love what you do. And you've seen parents lead, you've seen coaches lead, you've seen faculty lead, you've seen bosses lead. You got this. You know you can do this. So you go off on your journey and you start leading. Management experts say that if you're a leader and you turn around and no one's following you, you're just out for a walk. And that starts taking a toll on you because you realize, oh, maybe this isn't as easy as I thought it was. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I need to change. So you keep looking externally for your cues, but you start looking and moving into Quadrant 2, which is the experiment quadrant. You start looking at listening to podcasts and reading books and coming to conferences and seminars. You start trying to learn. You may even take certifications to try to figure out how to fix what's wrong with me. Many of our organizations follow this line too. They got started, they're founded, and have all this great joy and confidence, and it doesn't work out right, so they get stuck in Quadrant 2, where they're trying to figure out what's the right curriculum, what's the right method. I worked at a hospital system that used fish sticks, the Seattle fish market thing, and so I even got rubber fish that we throw at each other when we caught somebody doing something good. Instead of rubber chickens, they make rubber fish. And so we did, hey, that was a fish moment, good job. And we get this like goofy language to try to bond us together as a hospital. But then that didn't always work. So then we went to another methodology, where we did rounding and we sent thank you notes and all this. We just kept lurching from methodology to methodology. Our leaders often do that too. And it's not because they're bad people, but it's because the book covers look so promising. When you look at the covers of the books, it's just like, oh, my life will be so much better. You read 7 Habits for Highly Effective People, and then you read Raving Fans or 1 Minute Manager, and then you read, how many people here have read the book Getting Things Done? All right, a few of you. There's a book called Getting Things Done, and part of the premise David Allen has in this book is that we have so much stress in our being, in our mind, because we have all these lists and things that we need to do. And to have peace of mind, we can write out all of these to-do lists and have the next action steps that we have to do with each of the tasks, and then put them into files and have the files and have a regular system of checking in with those files. And you can walk into any area in your life with peace because you know you've got the files and you know what you need to do next when you get back to your desk. Well, I don't know about you, but I love writing lists. I will put things on lists that I've already done just so I can cross them off. Because I love me a good list. It's really fun. It feels really accomplishing. I carry my journal with me all the time. I write lists down. What I don't do well is the regular systematic checkup. Once I write a list, I forget about it. I don't look at it. It's like the traditional strategic plan for most nonprofits. You go through all the visioning, and then you put it on a shelf or on a shared drive so it gathers dust or digital dust. So that will kill your confidence because you feel like, wow, all these people on the book cover, they said this changed their life. They said that they have peace of mind now. I must be really broken because I can't even implement this system. And so you look for the next one. The good news is, for all of you here, I firmly believe if you feel like you're broken and you don't have what it takes, many leaders feel that way. They feel like maybe we should just get out of this position and make way for a new leader that can actually lead this. You may be broken, and I'm not going to gloss over that. There may be something that you need to fix. But I firmly believe that you might be on the verge of greatness because you can't move to Quadrant 3 without going through Quadrant 2. Quadrant 3 is where you start looking at the internal readings. You see, this whole time, we've only been working on the external half of the map, but we've always been having this inner voice, not the inner critic that says you're an idiot, but the inner voice that's saying, well, I don't think we should do this maybe, or nudges or gut senses. They've been going on the entire time, and we've been trying not to listen to them because we're told not to. Good leadership isn't about emotions. It's about facts and data and analysis, and we should do fact-based and data-based sort of leadership. So just don't get irrational. Don't listen to emotions. You nonprofits are so irrational. You're into like woo stuff. So we train ourselves not to listen to this voice. But if we start listening to this voice because we're so broken, we move into Quadrant 3, which is the analyze quadrant. And magic happens here. I'm going to give you 9 tools here, but before I do that, I want to finish the rest of the map. This is where you start looking at Quadrant 2 and you say, maybe I'm not broken because I don't like getting things done, but maybe there was something good I took from getting things done, even though I didn't take the whole package. And for me, it was the to-dos with the next action item. So when you looked at your task, you could see the next action item and you could go much faster on getting everything done because while you're thinking in the moment about the next task, you know what the next step is. Instead of getting back to your desk and trying to think, oh yeah, I had to do this. What does that mean? What do I have to do? You already have the next action item there. It's where you, instead of going to the store and just buying coats off the rack leadership suits and wearing somebody else's leadership suit, you actually start making a custom tailored leadership suit and figuring out what's your gift to the world? What's your gift to the organization? Why is your organization here? How is it different than every other? It's not that you disregard the external stuff because there's really good research, there's really good way. Fundraising in particular is counterintuitive. You don't intelligently, statistically convince people, you don't bludgeon people over the head with statistics to try to get them to give money. Well, we do, but that doesn't work. And so it doesn't make sense because you want to say that you're a good, trustworthy case. So we have to look at the good stuff here and know that it's storytelling that transforms. And you're going to learn a lot about that from Jeff and Jason and Tammy and Julia later today about really good fundraising tactics. So even though you don't like something, it doesn't mean that you just disregard it. But you can go through the rest of the day thinking about what parts can I take for myself and what parts can I take for my organization. As you start living that out and you start realizing, wow, I actually have something to contribute, your confidence rises again. And you move back up to Quadrant 4, which is the focused leader quadrant. Now, this is not everything is nirvana and smooth sailing and you're so focused as an individual. I don't want to be the dust jacket cover there. But it's where you are focused because you realize I have the whole map. Where am I taking my cues, externally or internally? If I'm feeling unconfident, what quadrant do I need to be in? You can be looking at Quadrant 1 is great because it teaches you who you need to follow. I firmly believe you are not safe as a leader unless you're a good follower. Leaders that can't follow are loose cannons. So you need to learn who's trustworthy of your respect. And you need to think about that old saying of you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. In Quadrant 1, you can be looking at who are the 5 people that are around me? Who am I surrounding myself with? And maybe to get to the next level, I need to branch out and surround myself with other people. Quadrant 2, you learn how you learn. which is really important to know. Are you an auditory learner? Do you like reading? Do you need to be moving around and doing kinesthetic learning? How do you learn? So that's really good in Quadrant 2. Quadrant 3 is where you start figuring out what your unique contribution is, and that's why you can become a focused leader in Quadrant 4. Your organization can be there too. As if you have staff that reports to you, you can now look at your map and say, okay, are they a Quadrant 1 leader, Quadrant 2, or Quadrant 3? And there's nothing wrong with being in any of those quadrants. There are good things that you can do in each quadrant and help them be the best in that quadrant so they can move on to the next one. Because the magic happens in Quadrant 3, we're going to spend the rest of our time together here. I've got 9 different strategies that I'd like you to consider that I know work with leaders and raising up the confidence. You'll see some surprises in this, and it may be some things that you can think about as you go through the rest of your day at this conference. The first part of Quadrant 3 is 3 major areas to look at. There's hardwiring, there's your identity, and there are goals, how you set goals. As you look to the overlapping areas of those, there's the personal mission, your personal style, your mission, and your values. And it's so incredibly important that we get clear on our values. And especially with the way things change so quickly nowadays, we need to know, and our employees need to know, what do we value as an organization? Let me tell you a story about, I was an alumni director who couldn't stop asking for major gifts at a prep school. Because I just love asking for money. It was so much fun. And it's something tangible to show I actually am doing something for my work, where relationships are so process-oriented, there's not really that hard data like scoreboard. So my boss at the boarding school said, here's all the other things I want you, here's the stuff, new fiscal year, you're back to 0, these are all your priorities this year. And I was feeling totally overwhelmed. So I took a legal pad and I wrote all of my current priorities from my previous fiscal year, and then in the next column, all the new ones. Because she was in Quadrant 2. She wanted to, things weren't hitting the right marks, and so she wanted to try something else. And with fear and trembling, I went into her office and said, I need your help. Here's all of the stuff I'm already doing. And here's all the new stuff that we're going to be putting onto my job description. Every single one of these things is an A1 priority. I totally can, in itself, I can describe and argue for why this is the most important thing for me to do. But there's only one of me, and there's only 24 hours a day, and I'm not supposed to spend them all here. So where do I err? If I'm straddling a line and a donor calls and I'm working on a grant proposal, do I pick up the phone because we have a value of live voices for picking up the phone? Or do I keep doing the grant proposal because we have a value of getting the grant proposal in by deadline? I just need to know what are the values that our organization, so I can make judgment calls in the moment. And so that's why, and she, to end that story, she leaned back in her chair and I thought, uh-oh, I'm fired. She didn't like this at all. And she didn't say anything. She kept looking at the sheet. Then I said, are you okay? And she said, oh, sorry. She kind of snapped to it. It turns out she was filling in the sheet with her own current things she was doing and the things the headmaster was asking her to do. She said, I wish I could take this to my boss and do this too. I'll submit to you, all of you can. It was just a matter of doing it. But knowing the values helped me immensely the next year because I couldn't do everything, but I would know that I was erring on the side of where the values were. When you have all those 6 areas together, you have what I call integrity because you're working with integration. You're working, you know when you're at work that you're bringing yourself to work. And you know when you're at home that you're not leaving stuff necessarily at work. That it's not that you're bringing work home, but you can be fully present where you are because you're working integrated and everything is kind of firing on all cylinders. So let's look at the Quadrant 3 step. First part is hardwiring. Most of us think of hardwiring as DISC assessments. Are you, extrovert, introvert, people-centered, task-centered? We'll look at that second. The first one is abilities hardwiring. This is for you as an individual. You can do this as an organization too. How many people here have taken the Highlands Abilities Battery? Has anybody? All right. It's a 3-hour test, and it's called a battery for a good reason. My mom took it when I was getting certified 15 years ago, and she called me up and said, Marc, I felt more mentally alert after 36 hours of labor with you and nothing to show for it. I'm a C-section baby. Than I did after this 3-hour test. What this does, most of the other tests are based on what your perceptions are. Would you rather go to a movie or would you rather stay home and read a book? This test is a bunch of corporate tests that force you to do seemingly stupid things under time pressure. So you have a picture. It's sort of like the highlights. Some of it's like the highlights books you used to get in the dentist's office, or some of us used to get. There's a picture of stuff, and then they remove that picture and they put another picture with some of the stuff removed. And you have to see which parts of the ones removed. They'll give you a jumble of letters and line it up with a word, and then they'll shift it around and you have to connect the dots. They'll give you dots on a folded piece of paper, and then they'll give you dots in the paper open, and you have to know which of the dots, which diagram shows where the dots really would be if the dots were like this when it was folded, if there were a hole stuck in there. Really stupid things. One of the tests is, one of the reasons tests like this were done is hotels, like what we're in. They needed housekeepers that could walk across the threshold and immediately see, oh, that lamp, that's 2 inches too far to the left. They could have checklists, but they don't have time to go through the checklist. We can do all of these tasks. We can do just about anything that comes at us if we are given enough time and enough education. But there are certain things that come really wired to us. So the Highlands Ability Battery helps show that. The first 4 strengths that it identifies are your personal style. The next 5 are drivers, where a lot of stress happens. If you're over a certain point and you're not getting that exhibited in your work, that can be an underlying cause of stress that you just don't understand. And then the final 10 are all environmental things. They're how you learn and how you interact with people, what makes you unique as you're going about your work as fundraising or leading. It wasn't for nonprofit fundraisers, but it works really well. So knowing, the reason that I'm sorry I took so long on this, the reason this is important for me as the head of a foundation for a hospital was that I found out I do paperwork pretty slowly, because there's a typing speed challenge, and then there's an accuracy challenge. Not only were you fast, but actually did you type the right things that you were supposed to type. So I was given the weird task of every board meeting, every month, I had the privilege of writing the minutes. What is that? We had a secretary. I don't know what his job was. Shouldn't he be doing that? But I was doing it, and my CFO, bless his heart, said that my writing the minutes allows me to shape the narrative. I can have the integrity of keeping everything that was discussed up there, but I could err on the side of the things I knew would actually move the foundation forward. That helped a little bit, but every month I had to remind myself, because I had a 45-minute board meeting, and then I had to block out 3 to 4 hours to do the minutes. Because if I didn't do the minutes that morning, yeah, you guys know, it's not good. There will be no minutes for the next board meeting. The first agenda of approving the minutes, where are they? Well, they're still last month in last month's notes. They're not there yet. So with the Highlands Ability Battery, it just gave me freedom to realize I'm an expensive, time-consuming paperwork person, but I just have to do that. And for those of you, we all have to do it, because our databases need to be updated after our visits too. So it's good to know that. But that's not the only type of hardwiring. The next type of hardwiring is the one that we're most familiar with, which is our behaviors. The one that I like the most is DISC. It's been around for about 3 millennia. It's the sanguine, choleric, melancholy, phlegmatic. The Greeks used to think we had different levels of liquids in our bodies that made us act differently. Why I love, is everybody familiar with DISC? Okay, not really, some of you. All right, so extroverts talk fast and they don't know what they're thinking until they've said it. They're verbal processors. Introverts have this amazing ability to think and then speak. It's shocking to us extroverts. Most of us, if we were to move into the quadrants in the room, most of us in the typical AFP conference are on the extrovert, people-centered side. People-centered people care about people. They want to know, how are you doing? How are the kids? They remember relationships. Task-centered people want the job to get done. And sometimes there are task-centered people that are fundraisers. You can be a good fundraiser in any part of your spectrum, but it's more important with your donors. And maybe your executive director or your board. I'm working with a CEO of a large PBS NPR nonprofit, and it turns out one of his board members is very task-centered in a way that he's not. He has the most stress because it's the quadrant opposite him. And so we have to go through on our coaching calls about, okay, so how are you going to address your board chair's concerns? Because he's full of concerns. And they're not necessarily bad, but they are killjoys to this extroverted, people-centered person. So knowing your behaviors is important because you can see how you show up in the world to other people. And you can also see, you can respond likewise to them. If you're at a donor meeting and somebody's talking slowly and asking about how the kids are, or how the family is, or how the people in your organization are, you might know that they're more reserved, people-centered. And so you might take a step back if you're a fast talker and just tone it down a bit to try to speak the dialect of the donor. If you're more naturally reserved, you know that it's going to take more effort to get out to meet donors, but you have to do that. We have to see donors in their natural habitat. That's where the magic happens. So you know that you're going to have to build some foundations around that. Islamic Relief USA's founder, I did this with their team in LA, and he was the only one on the introvert side of the staff. And the extroverts tried to keep pulling him over because they thought that it was bad that he was an introvert, which it's not. Introverts can be very social, and he was at every event. He just needed 3 days in between. Where the extroverts wanted, wow, it was a great event, let's do it again. Woohoo, let's have another fundraising event the next day. He needed 3 days in his apartment by himself with no interruptions to try to recharge. So you can know that with your behaviors as you know your behavior hardwiring. And then the third one is the motivations. Has anybody here taken the Enneagram or worked with the Enneagram at all? A few of you. 30 years I've been using this thing called the Enneagram, and it's only in the last year and a half that I brought it into my practice with leaders. What is fascinating about the Enneagram, we don't know exactly where it comes from. I heard it was from a Sufi wisdom tradition. If you look at the Homer's Odyssey, the 9 places he stopped on his journey really resemble the 9 types of human beings that the Enneagram brings out. If you look at Dante's Inferno, the 9 levels of hell closely resemble the 9 types in the Enneagram. What the Enneagram posits is that we all learn that what we bring to the table isn't enough early in our childhood, that we need to present as something else. And so that's our personality. And there's usually about 9 types of personality, 9 stories people tell themselves of how they can be successful and interact with the world. There are head-centered people that are 3 of the types. 3 of the types are heart-centered people, and 3 of the types are gut-centered people. Why I love this, if you're looking for a book, Beatrice Chestnut's 9 Types of Leaders is probably the best book because it's all about working in nonprofits and for-profits and how leaders bring themselves and show up at work based on their motivations. If you looked only at behaviors, you could see goal-setting, driven, accomplishment people and 3 different people, but they may be operating from 3 entirely different stories. The first one may just be showing up and setting goals and accomplishing them because he really believes he has to be successful in everything he does. If he's a failure, that's a moral flaw. So he wants to be successful, and so winning is his thing. The second person, she may just want new excitement and new experiences and trying all new things, and that makes her accomplish goals because she's trying new things. She's not there when the confetti drops and the success happens because she's already on to the next thing. And the third person, she might be getting these goals done because her story is, I have to protect the people around me, my staff, my family, the people we serve. I have to protect them from bullying. And so that type of person shows up and tries to put parameters around people so that her stuff isn't harmed. And so they're all showing aggressive goal-setting, goal-getting sort of activity, but they're from very different stories. So hardwiring is just one part of Quadrant 3, but it helps you figure out how is it that I interact and operate with the world. Another part is your identity. This is your stories. If you were to all pull out your phones, you don't have to, but if you were to pull out your phone, some of you have iOS phones. I have an Android OS. Some may have BlackBerry. That's your operating system. Human beings' operating system is story. This research is solid on this, and I can talk to you in breaks or later if you want to, but the research is really, if you want to teach students math, you teach them story form, how to tell a good story, and they get mathematical problems better than they do if they don't understand narrative storytelling. It's amazing the research that's been done there. So let's look at 3 different types of stories. The first one you'll be the most familiar with because you're in a group of people. How many people in this room there are people in this room that you haven't yet met? Okay, so you're, I guess, very popular because you know everybody. Cool, all right. But typically at a conference like this, that's the case. So think about your stock stories. When I was in college, I was dating this really, really awesome woman, young lady, and trying to impress her. So I told her something. And my roommate rolled his eyes and looked at her and said, if you're with him any length of time, you're going to hear that story a lot. That's one of his stock stories. And she has. She's 24 years this past May. She's the one rolling her eyes now. But so think about this as you're going through the breaks and lunch and the happy hour at the end. What are the stories that you use to identify yourself, to help people understand who you are? Start cataloging those. When I went to my first nonprofit storytelling conference, I thought I should get in touch with these. I ended up listing over the course of a few days 600 prompts, story prompts. of just different stories I tell myself, and it moved into a second area of stories that we tell ourselves, the ones that we'd never tell anybody else but are going on in our head all the time. Oh, I always do that. Oh man, I'm so bad with names. I remember faces but not names. As you go through looking at your stories, Jessica Sharp, if you ever want to learn more about how your brain acts on stress, Jessica Sharp of Sharp Brain Consulting has her clients go through the stock stories and listening to either for a day or for 3 days or a week, just writing out what are you saying to yourself right now? And then she has this powerful question. Review the list, look at it and say, would you ever say that to a friend? Typically, no. Typically, we're much harder and more brutal on ourselves than we'd ever be on a friend. So, one of the things you might want to do as you walk through the rest of this day is try to be your own best friend. If you mess up, don't say, I always mess up, I'm such an idiot. Maybe you're training your voice to say, man, I did it again, but I'm getting better. For me, it was faces and names. I could remember faces forever, but I couldn't remember names so well. And then I realized that's memory. Maybe I need to re-script myself. So I said, I must be really, internally, I would never say this to other people, but hey, I can remember faces, so I must remember names too. And I've noticed, it's taken 30 years, but I've noticed that I've changed and I have a much better ability to remember names. So knowing what your stock stories are knows how you're directing yourself. The other type of stories that you could do are the characters you identify with. There's an author named John Eldredge, who is the person I learned this from. He said, think about the books and the movies and the stories that you gravitate towards, and then think about the characters that you most identify with. Fascinating thing. The typical pattern for most of us that do this is dumb. This means nothing, and then you can unpack the characters. So let me take you, the person I told you about with the NPR PBS, he was, and he lets me tell the story. He did this homework. He said, I don't know. This is weird. So the next time we got on the call and he said, Marc, I got nothing for you. There are two people. Sean Connery in Hunt for Red October and Kevin Costner in Dances with Wolves. What do they have in common? I mean, British and American, nothing. So I took it upon myself to do the research. I watched both movies because that was serving well, and I love movies. And we were able to parse together the story of both of them were military characters, military figures, who were willing to learn more about the enemy and learn their language, the Americans or the Native Americans, and try to figure out maybe we could coexist, maybe we could work together, which threatened the armies that they served. And so the armies wanted to kill them and kick them out. Why does this matter for this guy? He was in a traditional TV broadcast that had shifted to radio broadcast medium, and the unionized labor force wanted to go back to the big TV studios because where the cameras were big and you needed a lot of space because they were hot. But he was actually trying to think about, what about digital podcasting? NPR One hadn't come out at that point. It was just about to come out. So I think podcasting is something where we could serve our audience better. And I think we could split our radio station so it's not mixed format, but it's news and a separate classical station. Totally threatened the laborized union force to the point where they were sending poison pen letters to their board, trying to get the CEO fired. But in our calls after that, we were able to say, okay, you're under attack, but you're doing the right thing. It's for the right reasons. And let's see, and then we tried to help him show the staff how this is fulfilling the mission. This isn't a new thing, it's not a change, it's not a curveball, it's trying to address with new technology. Knowing the characters that you resonate with can be really significant. One woman in Chicago said Katniss and Princess Leia. She came up really quickly. And I said, why? And she said, they were both badasses who could fight. There are women who are badasses who could fight, and I need to with my board, because her board had told her, I don't really know why we have this organization. I think we're just a jobs program for you guys, for the staff. And he was going to be the board chair in 6 months. Yeah. So, and she said, Princess Leia held her head high and still was a warrior. And so on our subsequent calls, we were able to harken back to that and set up a curriculum, that a seemingly winsome and non-scheduled curriculum for that board chair. Every 3 to 4 weeks, she'd say, oh, hey, I just come across this article, or I just came across this video. I think you guys should watch it. And she started training the vice chair too, so that she wouldn't be too infected by the one term of this other guy. So knowing your stories are important. The last one is a little bit more morbid. It's your eulogy. What would people say if you died? What would your business colleagues, your nonprofit colleagues, your community, your family, friends, what would they say? And if that's too weird, because it is, Think about if you weren't to come home today. What would be written about you in the newspaper? And then you can look at it and say, that's not what I want. I want something else to be said about me. And maybe I know for me it was my kids. I want my kids to know they love them, and I showed the love by staying in the office and making sure that I was providing financially for them. And when I did my eulogy, I realized, they would not know that was loving them. They know FaceTime. And so we tried, not the tech, but like the physical incarnate FaceTime. So we tried to make sure that there were ways that I was actually supporting being a parent in a way that they understood, and that was good for our marriage too, to do that. Third part of the analyze step is your goals. And I've saved this to last only because two reasons. One, there's a ton of books on goal setting. There's a ton of good material out there. And the other is there's a workbook that I'll also send you if you want to do that with your card on how to actually work this out with the roadmaps. But let me walk you through the process. I had a weird childhood growing up. I had schoolwork because I went to school, so I had homework from my school. And then my parents gave me homework as well. They said, you're a pitman, so you're going to listen to these positive motivational tapes. Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, Bob Berg, and you're going to listen to a side of a tape and take notes on it each day. And you're going to read books, How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling with Frank Bettger, and Zig Ziglar's See at the Top, and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. That was I didn't know that families didn't operate that way. I thought everybody had school homework and family homework. So from a very young age, I've been studying goal setting. And about 15 years ago, I didn't realize I was in Quadrant 3 at that point, but I decided, what if I analyzed all that I like about goal setting and put it into one system? And so this is what I've done. The first step is to write a list of 100 things. The first time I did this was for my life. I try to do this every year now, and I keep it in my journal, and every time I transfer a journal, I rewrite the 100 things. Why I like 100 things is that it forces you to get past the practical into the fanciful. One of my 100 things is I want to be interviewed by Oprah. And I kept it on the list even though she doesn't have her TV show anymore because she's still an influencer. And I'm a real student of language. So somewhere along the way in the 15 years, I started saying I want to be positively interviewed by Oprah. I don't think she does hit job interviews, but I don't want to be the first. So I'm just trying to be really clear on what my stated goals are. When we do this with Quadrant 3 Leadership Intensive, where we get leaders around a table and actually carve out time in the day to actually do this, most of them find within a short time that they're bringing themselves to their list. They're of the things. They're forgetting that they had these goals for their family, or they had these educational dreams that aren't really work-related, but they really wanted to learn how to cook or pick up a new language, or travel dreams. And they'll often say to me, Marc, come over here. Is that okay that I put this on my list? I said, yeah, it's your list. You could put whatever you want on there and just fill up the 100. What will tend to happen is the first 10 come really quickly, the next 10 don't. And then you'll get another spurt of about 20, and so it may take a few days to do this. As you do this, if you just write out your 100, what do you want in your relationships? What do you want in your economics, your education, travel? There's all sorts of ways you can look at this. If you did nothing but this, put it in a drawer, I know you'd be shocked if you pulled it out 12 months later and looked at it. There's something about writing goals down that has a crystallizing effect, and we orient ourselves and our activity around them even when we're not aware of it. I've had more people that have gotten not past this step that have Skype called me or phone called me and said, oh my goodness, I put this thing down there and I thought it was fanciful and out there, and now I just stumbled across the list. That's my life now. I'm living like this. One executive director I coached put down just 9 months ago, exercise 5 days a week. She's like, that's never going to happen. Not with the kind of workload I have and the family load I have. She just told me last month, it's happening. I looked at my list again. Every 5 days a week, she's getting up at 5 in the morning and enjoying it. It's like she didn't. So writing it down is good. But then what I want you to do is look it out, take it out again and look at it and read it all through, and then just write what I call the history of the future. Project yourselves 12 months into the future, and you've accomplished everything that is on the list. How do you feel about yourself? What are other people saying about you? What's your partner or spouse or friends? What are they saying? What is your board or your work environment saying? What is your community saying about you? Write it down. It doesn't have to be long. It could be just a couple paragraphs. Some people do 4 pages. I wouldn't. I'd just do a couple paragraphs. And then put that in the drawer. Having done this, one development director wrote this and said, holy cow, my staff doesn't have any clue. I want our workplace to be a fun workplace to be in. Because they just see the goals and the grind and the back to zero. I actually have this I'm operating from this belief system that I want, but they don't see it. So that helped her clarify what she wants to do. And then you look for the magnet goals. And the magnet goals there's two kinds of magnet goals. What you do is you take your list out again, read your history of the future, and then you look through your list, and I like to take a Sharpie and put dots next to the goals that either make sense logically. If I accomplish this goal, I'll accomplish a lot of others with it. If planting a garden was one of my goals, I'll also write, and I wrote out plant carrots, plant cabbage, plant radish, because I'm trying to get to 100. Weed, and all that. If I plant the garden, all these other goals are going to go with it. That's a magnet goal. But then there are going to be some that just kind of pop off the page or give you a little spurt of joy. And just put a dot next to it. Review those and try to choose the 3 to 5. When I did this 15 years ago, I was in a startup mode. I just moved from the boarding school on Long Island to Maine to take over our family's homestead, and I was trying to do this whole fundraising coach thing that's now Conquer Leadership Group. And one of the goals that popped up was ballroom dancing lessons with my wife. Like, eating on a daily basis was where my mentality was at. Like, how do I provide for my family? But ballroom dancing lessons with my wife came up. And if you get the workbook, you'll see that became a powerful goal that I didn't even know the impact until later. But it was because I was trying to figure out, we can't afford lessons and a babysitter. So what if we had a tutor come here and we'd have conversations with her? How do we do this? What if we had friends come over and do this? A year later, she said, Marc, that goal meant so much to me because even though you were in the startup mode and trying to provide for us, I still knew I was first. You hadn't married the business, you still married me. So there's working through that, there's a whole roadmap. You put the goal at the top, what has to be done, what dates have to get done, who's going to help you with that, what obstacles you may encounter, what resources can help you with those, and who's your accountability partner or coach. As you're doing that and you're going through the grind of getting back to zero, continually coming back to, every year is going to start back to zero, but as you start moving into the space of Quadrant 3, you're able to see that you probably have this. You've created magic in the past. You've hit your marks in the past. Not marks, hopefully, like me, but other marks, like your goals. You've hit your goals in the past. And what's going to be fascinating is these next set of circles. I must be into circles today. Stephen Covey talks about a circle of concern, which is all the stuff we're worried about. All the studies that show that there are fewer donors than ever before. The tensions in Iran, the stuff going on in China, the Uyghur population that's being brutally treated by the Chinese government, things going on if the economy is going down or if the economy is going up. All of this is in our circle of concern. But most of us have a much smaller circle of influence. We can't do a whole lot about a lot of things, but there are certain things that we can do something about. Fewer donors, we can't move the needle nationally on the number of people that are actually being generous, but we can in our organization. We can show them without beyond a shadow of a doubt that we love them and that they are amazing partners with us in our mission and the mission that is being done through the nonprofit. And what Covey said is, as you do that, your circle of influence expands, where you'll find people start coming to you and asking you for different opinions. And people in the community might be saying, hey, how do we get this done? And your influence expands to better reach your entire circle of concern. So as you go through the rest of Fundraising Day Wisconsin, think about your circle of concern and try to figure out what's the circle of influence that I can do. And then what is the Quadrant 3 approach to this? What's my hardwiring like? What are my behaviors like? What is my identity? What are the stories? Because, like I said, the committee brought together a huge, great lineup of people with Julia and Tammy and Jeff and Jason. But there's also all of you. All of you have something to contribute to the conversation. And people need to hear what your insights are. So please don't be afraid of sharing that in the hallways and the other times that you're together. Because if you feel like you are fundamentally broken and may not have what it takes, you may actually be really on the verge of greatness. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.